Feverish and delirious, Bob Stevens arrived at a Florida hospital in the early morning hours of October 2, 2001. The emergency room doctors thought the 62-year-old photojournalist might be suffering from meningitis. But when an infectious disease specialist looked at Stevens' spinal fluid under a microscope, he realized there was another, terrifying possibility. Lab tests confirmed it, and on October 4, Stevens was diagnosed with inhalation anthrax, a bacterial disease primarily found in livestock that the Center for Disease Control, CDC, had recognized as a potential agent of bioterrorism. Over the next 2 months, Stevens and 4 other people would die after inhaling anthrax, and 17 others would be infected, either by inhaling anthrax or getting it on their skin. The lethal spores arrived via a series of letters mailed to locations in 4 states, Florida, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and Washington, D.C., spreading a new wave of panic across a nation already reeling from the terrorist attacks of 9/11 just weeks earlier. After anthrax was discovered at Stevens' workplace, American media, and 2 more of his colleagues of his were found to have been exposed. State authorities in Florida, including the state's then-governor, Jeb Bush, initially tried to calm the public down by insisting there was no terror link. The first day or 2 following that announcement were words of denial that this would have been related to any terrorism event, but it was somehow a freak outbreak of some sort, says Leonard Cole, an expert on bioterrorism and terror medicine and author of the anthrax letters. But as more information came out, it became clear that there had been some conscious, deliberate release of anthrax. The FBI launched an investigation, and by early November had found 3 of the letters containing anthrax spores, including one sent to the offices of Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle in Washington, D.C., and the New York Post and NBC in New York City. The public furor only intensified after law enforcement authorities determined that the first group of anthrax-laced letters had been posted from a mailbox in New Jersey on September 18, 2001, just a week after the 9/11 attacks. A second bunch of letters had been mailed on October 9. In addition to anthrax powder, some of the letters also contained threatening notes using radical Islamic rhetoric, including such phrases as "death to America," "death to Israel," "Allah is great." Concern about bioterrorism had ramped up in the years prior to the anthrax attacks, with increased awareness of and training in dealing with anthrax and other select agents, or those biological agents, bacteria, fungi, viruses, known to be potential weapons. This increased focus helped health officials respond more effectively to the attacks than they might otherwise have been able to do. In early 2002, President Bush announced he would be requesting some $11 billion over the next 2 years to further protect the nation from bioterrorism. Meanwhile, the FBI continued their investigation, focusing by mid-2002 on Dr. Stephen Hatfill, a scientist who had once worked in the U.S. Army's Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases, USAMRIID, at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which kept stocks of anthrax. Identified as a person of interest in the attacks, Hatfill steadfastly maintained his innocence and was eventually cleared. He would successfully sue the U.S. Justice Department for defamation, winning a $5.8 million settlement in 2008. FBI investigators then zeroed in on another scientist, Dr. Bruce E. Ivins, who also worked at USAMRIID and had been trying to develop a more effective vaccine against anthrax. Placed under 24-hour surveillance and banned from the labs where he had spent some 30 years, Ivins was hospitalized for depression and anxiety, and in July 2008 committed suicide by taking a lethal dose of acetaminophen, Tylenol. In February 2010, the FBI closed its investigation into the anthrax attacks after more than 8 years, issuing a 92-page report that concluded that Ivins carried out the attacks entirely on his own. But the results of the investigation were later called into question by the National Academy of Sciences, which issued a study in 2011 determining that while the scientific evidence supports the idea that Ivins might have been the perpetrator, it does not prove it conclusively. In the wake of that study, a 2014 report by the Governmental Accountability Office, GAO, found that the scientific methods, including genetic data, the FBI used to identify Ivins as the culprit were flawed, casting further doubt on its conclusions. If the anthrax attacks of 2001 sharpened the nation's focus on protecting itself against future acts of bioterrorism, that focus faltered in the decades that followed, says Cole. Immediately after the attacks, we were on a rocketing upwards of concern, funding, and preparedness and general awareness, Cole says. But as is part of human nature, I guess, the more distant you are from the actual time of the events, the less people will be concerned about it. Prepared or not, the threat of another biological attack remains real. In late September 2018, letters were mailed to the Pentagon that reportedly contain ricin, a poison extracted from castor beans that has been used in previous bioterrorist attacks. It was January 6, 1982, a bitter cold evening with blizzard-like conditions, when two women hitchhikers vanished from the popular ski resort town of Breckenridge, Colorado, and were later found shot to death. Even though the women, 29-year-old Bobby Jo Oberholtzer and 21-year-old Annette Schnee, disappeared on the same day, their cases were not linked until Annette's body was discovered 6 months later. She was wearing an orange sock, a recent Christmas present from her mother. Investigators had found her other orange sock near the body of Bobby Jo, and they knew then that the women almost certainly were killed by the same person. But for nearly 40 years, the identity of their killer confounded police, even though he was within their grasp the night of the murders. It was only when the killer was identified decades later that investigators learned the bitter truth. On the night of the murders, authorities had launched an all-out effort to rescue a local miner, Alan Lee Phillips, whose truck became stuck in a raging snowstorm. It would be decades before police realized Phillips had, only hours before the rescue, killed Bobby Jo and Annette. Details of Phillips' rescue and his crimes were revealed during his trial this year, where he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and other charges. Some recall that the weather on the night of the murders was brutal, with temperatures plunging to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. When Phillips' truck got stuck in a snowdrift on a mountain pass, he began using his truck's headlights to signal SOS in Morse code. Incredibly, a sheriff flying overhead on a commercial jetliner spotted the signal through the falling snow and alerted the crew, who radioed down to dispatch at the sheriff's office. Dave Montoya, a local fire chief, heard the call and offered to drive up the pass. When he arrived, he was met with a familiar face. He had worked alongside Phillips in the mines, and on Phillips' face, Montoya recalls, was a prominent bruise. He told Montoya he got it when he fell while wandering around in the snow. Police now believe that Phillips got the bruise when Oberholtzer hit him in the face with a special brass key ring made by her husband, Jeff. He specifically made it for her in case she ever encountered trouble while hitchhiking, partly because investigators did not believe Jeff Oberholtzer had a solid alibi. He became a suspect in his wife's murder. 48 Hours, contributor Natalie Morales interviewed Oberholtzer and highlights the 40-year journey to bring Phillips to justice in an encore of Last Seen in Breckenridge, airing Saturday, August 26th at 10/9C on CBS and streaming on Paramount+. To live under this cloud of suspicion for as long as you did, what did that do to you? Morales asked Oberholtzer on location in Colorado. Jeff Oberholtzer continued to reside in the area even after his wife was murdered. It was very painful, he replied, being under suspicion from not only the authorities, but also being tried in the court of public opinion. People didn't want a suspected murderer in their house. It would take a long time for the full story to unravel, but Oberholtzer eventually was cleared. As it turned out, Phillips' first victim that January day was Annette Schnee, a housekeeper at a local Holiday Inn. After Annette left work, she visited a doctor and then hitchhiked to a drugstore in Breckenridge later that afternoon. Hitchhiking was very common in the mountain towns back in the 1980s. Annette got some medication at the drugstore and was not seen after 4:45 p.m. that day. Authorities now believe Phillips picked up Annette in his truck. A few hours later, at about 7:50 p.m., Oberholtzer disappeared. Oberholtzer was at a pub that night with a few friends, and at 6:21 p.m., she called her husband, Jeff. She said she'd be home relatively soon. She said she had a ride, Jeff told 48 Hours. Jeff said he fell asleep watching TV. When he woke up around midnight, and Bobby Jo still was not home, he felt something was terribly wrong. He said he went out looking for her and tried to report her missing. Breckenridge police told him they could not do anything for 24 hours, so he returned home. Just hours later, Jeff said he received a call from a rancher in the area who said he had found Bobby Jo's license on his property. Jeff rushed over and, on his way, he said he spotted Bobby Jo's distinctive blue backpack on the side of the road and stopped to retrieve it. He said he also found 2 items, Bobby Jo's right glove and a tissue, both of which had traces of blood. No one knew it then, but decades later, those traces of blood would lead directly to Phillips. Police have always credited Bobby Joe with fighting back enough to draw that blood. The next day, January 7th, worried friends formed a search party and went out on skis looking for Bobby Joe. Around 3 p.m. that afternoon, they located her body in a snowbank where Phillips had shot and killed her. Jim Harkey, then an agent for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, said Bobby Joe was fully clothed, and an autopsy would later reveal she was not sexually assaulted. A pair of zip ties were on one of her wrists. Not far away was that special keychain made by Jeff. There was another item found not far from Bobby Joe's body, an orange sock or bootie. It seemed to have no direct connection to the crime scene, or at least none that was readily apparent, according to Harkey. It was just one of those mysterious things that you pick up at a crime scene that you keep until you know what it is or never will find out, Harkey said. One of the many twists in the case is that, at that point, authorities did not yet know that Schnee was missing. They had never even heard her name. It wasn't until 2 days later, on January 8th, that a co-worker of Annette's called Frisco police to report that Schnee had not come to work at the Holiday Inn for 2 days. That was very unlike Annette, said her sister Cindy French. Police traced Schnee's movements to the drugstore in Breckenridge, but there her trail vanished. She seemed to have simply disappeared. Mom would just say, "I just want to know why, how." French remembers. And nobody can give it to me. Nobody knows why or how. But on July 3rd, 1982, nearly 6 months after Schnee was last seen alive, a young boy out fishing came upon her body in a stream, about 23 miles from where she was last seen in Breckenridge. Agent Harkey attended the autopsy. No bullet was recovered, but forensics showed that Annette was shot in the back as she was running downhill toward that stream, authorities said. Harkey suspected Annette had been sexually assaulted, but it was impossible to tell given the amount of time her body had been in the stream. Harkey based his assumption about the sexual assault on the state of Annette's clothing. The zipper on her jeans was broken, and her shoes were on the wrong feet. During the autopsy, Harkey spotted something that would forever change the investigation. On her left foot, "I noticed an orange bootie," he said. And in my mind, I'm remembering the orange bootie that was found at the top of Hoosier Pass, very close to where Bobby Joe Oberholtzer's body was found. So it tied the two together. As Harkey told 48 Hours, "Holy yes, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. This is amazing. This ties the cases together." In piecing together the timeline of events the day of the murders, detectives believe that Phillips first picked Schnee up hitchhiking, assaulted, and killed her. During that assault, Schnee lost her orange bootie in Phillips' truck. Later that day, police believe Phillips picked up Oberholtzer hitchhiking and attempted to assault her as well. Detectives believe that when Oberholtzer fought back and jumped from his truck, she kicked out the orange bootie left there by Annette. The orange socks/booties convinced police that they were looking for one killer, but Phillips' identity remained hidden for decades. In early 2020, Park County Detective Sergeant Wendy heard about something called genetic genealogy, in which specially trained genealogists upload a DNA sample from a crime scene through publicly available DNA databases. Kipple submitted the DNA from the blood collected in connection with the Oberholtzer murder to United Data Connect, a genetic genealogy company located in Denver. On January 9, 2021, I get a phone call from the genealogist, and he says, "I have 2 more names for you." "And what were the 2 names you were given?" Morales asked Kipple. "Alan Phillips and Bruce Phillips," Kipple replied. "And Bruce Phillips was the brother that never lived here, didn't have any ties to Colorado." "And what did you learn about Alan Phillips?" Morales asked. "Alan Phillips still lived nearby," Kipple said. "He had worked here in the mine, Henderson Mine. 4 decades he worked there. He had his own mechanic shop, and he was still here." As it turned out, he was the person authorities had rescued that long ago night in a snowstorm, the man with the large bruise on his face. But it took nearly 40 years to connect that rescue victim to the man who killed Annette Schnee and Bobby Joe Oberholtzer. On November 7, 2022, Phillips was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Phillips died by suicide in prison on February 27, 2023. Career criminal Donald Eugene Webb is wanted for the murder of 31-year-old Saxonburg, Pennsylvania Police Chief Gregory "Greg" Adams. He is currently on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. Saxonburg is a small town 25 miles north of Pittsburgh. Crime was virtually non-existent there. At around 2:50 p.m. on the afternoon of December 4, 1980, 16-year-old Tiger Freeling heard the sounds of gunfire and a fight coming from outside his bedroom. He believed the sounds were coming from the parking lot of a nearby store. He told his mother Midge about the sounds, so she went outside to investigate. In some nearby bushes, she found Greg, severely injured. He told her that he had been shot and asked her to summon help. When she asked him who attacked him, he told her that he did not know the assailant. Looking up, she saw a white car driving away from the scene. She tried to comfort him, but he asked her to pray for him because he did not think he would make it. Within 3 minutes, paramedics arrived at the scene. Greg was taken to the hospital. He had been shot twice and beaten severely. Sadly, he died of his injuries soon after. He left behind his wife Mary and 2 young sons, Greg Jr. and Ben, and a grieving community who demanded answers. Within hours, state police investigators were on the scene of the shooting, a parking lot of the Agway feed store. It was determined that Greg had been shot during a routine traffic stop. The killer's driver's license was found at the scene. It is believed that it came out of Greg's hand when he was shot. The license belonged to a man named Stanley John Portis. Also found at the scene was the gun used to kill Greg. It had been emptied and was void of any serial numbers. As a result, they were unable to trace it to anyone. The driver's license belonging to Portis turned out to be the key piece of evidence. It had a date of birth and an address in New Jersey. Police determined that he had died in 1948 and was buried in a cemetery in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. They also discovered that he had a widow. When she was contacted, she told them that she had since remarried. Her new husband was Donald Eugene Webb. He had completely taken on Portis's identity. Webb was a member of the Fall River Gang, a group that robbed stores and homes throughout the East Coast. Police believe that on the day before the shooting, Webb and an accomplice had visited a Saxonburg jewelry store. Webb asked to look at some rings. During this time, he and the accomplice cased the store, determining where the jewelry was kept, how it was protected, the location of the alarm systems, and the number of employees that were working. The next day, Greg was working his final shift before taking his annual vacation. At approximately 1:45 p.m., he left the police station to begin his patrol. He was last seen by witnesses near the intersection of Water Street and Butler Street. He, along with the other witnesses, noticed a white Mercury Cougar not stop at a stop sign. This caught his attention immediately. He made a U-turn on Water Street and followed the vehicle. He lost sight of it after making the turn, but then spotted it attempting to turn around in the Agaway parking lot. He then blocked it from exiting the parking lot. Most police officers are trained to approach a traffic stop from the rear. However, due to the positioning of the cars, Greg could not make that type of stop. He instead had to approach from the front. As a result, he was in a bad position. As he approached Webb, he asked for his driver's license. He then looked at the information to see if it matched Webb. It is believed that at that point, Webb pulled out his gun and fired at Greg. Based on blood trails at the scene, the two got involved in an intense struggle on the ground. At one point, Greg was able to shoot his gun and apparently hit Webb, as Webb's blood was also found at the scene. Eventually, they ended up in the bushes next to the Freeling home. Webb, realizing Greg's gun was empty, then beat him over the head with it. He then fled the scene. 17 days later, his car was found in Warwick, Rhode Island. Blood linked to him was found in it. It is believed that he has since returned to southern New England. On December 8, 1980, Greg was laid to rest at a funeral attended by several hundred officers from all over the state. The town of Saxonburg has since erected a monument to memorialize Greg's life and death. On it, the town's residents have inscribed a thank you to a man who gave his life protecting their community. This case originally aired on the January 20th, 1987 special number 1 episode of Unsolved Mysteries hosted by Raymond Burr in an FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list along with Leo Khoury, Victor Gerena, Claude Dallas, James Dias, Danny Weeks, Thomas Harrelson, and Robert Litchfield. It was excluded from the FilmRise release of Robert Stack episodes. It was later covered in more detail in a full segment on the December 13, 1989 episode. This case was also profiled on America's Most Wanted before it was resolved. After Webb eluded capture for more than 3 decades, he was removed from the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list on March 31, 2007. He was on the list longer than any other fugitive before Victor Jarena, who surpassed his record in 2010. In November 2016, the FBI discovered a secret room off of a closet in the home of Webb's 82-year-old former wife Lillian in North Dartmouth, Massachusetts. They suspected that he may have hidden there after the murder. A cane was also found there, which was believed to have been used by him after he was shot in the leg by Greg. Faced with the possibility of jail time for harboring a fugitive, she decided in July 2017 to confess to investigators about what happened to Webb. Lillian explained that after Greg's murder, Webb was treated for his leg injury at Toby Hospital in Wareham, under the alias John. He spent 1 month there. After his release, he lived in a hidden room in the basement of her New Bedford home. In 1997, she bought the Dartmouth home, where Webb lived in the basement and also hid in the secret room there. He suffered multiple strokes over the years and died in December 1999 at the age of 68. She then placed him in a green Tupperware storage container and buried him in the backyard. On July 13, 2017, human remains were found there. On July 14, the remains were identified as Webb's. For Lillian's cooperation, she received immunity from prosecution. The case is now considered closed. On July 27, 1996, at Centennial Park, Fallon Stubbs and her 44-year-old mother, Alice Hawthorne, were visiting Atlanta, Georgia, celebrating her 14th birthday. Just before 1:20 a.m., they stopped to take a photo when a bomb shattered the Olympic Games, killing Alice and injuring hundreds. A security guard named Richard Jewell soon became the prime suspect, but he was soon cleared in the case. A task force of several state and federal investigators was created. Within the next 7 months, 2 more bombings would occur in Atlanta. One at an abortion clinic on January 16, 1997, and another at a lesbian bar on February 21, 1997, injuring dozens. Investigators discovered that the bomber was planting a second device apparently designed to injure police officers and rescue personnel that responded to the first bomb. FBI and ATF technicians recreated the bombings and found that all 3 were linked through forensic evidence. After the third bombing, letters were left by the Army of God, an unknown terrorist group who claimed responsibility for the 3 bombings. The writer mentioned certain details about the bombs that had not been released to the public. The writer targeted homosexuals, abortionists, and members of the federal government. An FBI profiler analyzed the letters and believed that the bomber's true target was law enforcement. On January 29, 1998, abortion clinic nurse Emily Lyons arrived early for work. She and off-duty police officer and security guard Robert Sanderson were walking to the entrance of the clinic in Birmingham, Alabama, when she noticed an overturned flower pot that looked out of place. When Robert tried to move it, it exploded. Shrapnel killed him and seriously injured Emily, who had several screws and nails in 90% of her body. Investigators realized that the bomber had finally achieved his goal, murdering a law enforcement officer. But this time, forensics revealed that the bomb was detonated by a remote control, meaning that the bomber was nearby. A witness came forward claiming that he noticed a mysterious man leave the scene of the bombing, take off a wig, and drive away in a pickup truck. The witness wrote down his license plate, which was traced to 31-year-old Eric Rudolph. An arrest warrant was placed for him in February 1998. Eric resided in western North Carolina. A SWAT team raided his trailer. The air conditioner was still running, and there was food on the table. They had missed him by just a few minutes. When he was a teenager, he told friends that if he ever got in trouble with the law, he would disappear into the mountains. Several hundred law enforcement officers searched through Nantahala National Forest after his truck was found abandoned nearby. However, no other trace of him was found. Investigators learned that Eric had been raised in a family of white supremacists and separatists. He had also served in the U.S. Army and was an experienced outdoorsman and survivalist. His former sister-in-law recalled that he was a hateful person. He always talked about negative things, like hatred against authority, gun laws, and the government. The last sighting of Eric was in July 1998 by a close friend, George Nordman, who owned a grocery store and lived in a remote mountain cabin. He approached George about food, but he decided to not help him. Just 2 nights later, the Nordmans were raided. Several pounds of food and a truck were stolen, most likely by Eric. He remains on the FBI's most wanted list. He has been charged with the 3 bombings in Atlanta and bombing in Birmingham, along with the murders of Alice Hawthorne and Robert Sanderson. This case first aired on the June 12, 2002 episode. The possible connection between the then unsolved Atlanta bombings and a series of bombings in Spokane was featured on the May 16, 1997 episode. The case was previously profiled on America's Most Wanted during the investigation and later documented on episodes of FBI, Criminal Pursuit and 1990s, the deadliest decade after Rudolph was arrested. Captured. In May 2003, the police picked up a homeless man going through the trash in North Carolina and brought him to the police station. They noticed that he seemed to be identical to the Eric Rudolph wanted poster. They soon confirmed his identity while in custody. He had been living off scraps and leftovers from the trash. Eric was charged with 2 counts of murder and several counts of terrorism. Along with his truck being seen fleeing the last bombing, investigators had other evidence that connected him to the bombings. At least 15 friends and acquaintances of his identified his voice as being the caller who contacted 911 30 minutes before the Centennial Park bombing. His handwriting and punctuation was similar to that found in the 4 letters left by Army of God. Identical brown cotton fibers were found on the Centennial Park bomb debris, the Army of God letters, and his truck. 5 shell casings found in his storage locker contained powder chemically consistent with debris from the Centennial Park bomb. Nails found in it were similar to ones used in the later bombings. A sibling of Eric's also claimed that, prior to the Centennial Park bombing, he had mentioned that the Olympics would be the prime target for a terrorist attack. A specific technique used to carry the backpack that held the Centennial Park bomb was taught and commonly used at an army school that he attended. Finally, a Tennessee gun dealer identified him as the man who bought 50 pounds of smokeless powder several years before the bombings. Investigators said that powder was connected to the Centennial Park bomb. Faced with the evidence against him, Eric entered a plea bargain in August 2005. He was sentenced to 4 life terms in prison in exchange for telling authorities where he hid several explosives in the North Carolina wilderness. On the afternoon of November 18, 1987, 20-year-old Jay Cook and his 18-year-old girlfriend, Tanya Van Cuylenborg, took a ferry from Victoria, British Columbia, to Washington State. They were going to pick up furnace parts in Seattle for his father Gordon's business. This was to be their first trip together, and they had planned on a romantic weekend. They had been dating for about 6 months. They spent most of their free time together, visiting at each other's houses. Jay's mother, Leona, believed that Tanya was quite special to him. Tanya's father, William, felt that they seemed to be good for each other. He had no apprehensions about them being together, and was, in fact, very comfortable with it. At some time during their journey, Jay and Tanya's peaceful vacation turned into a violent nightmare. Their trip began in Victoria, where they took the 4 p.m. car ferry to Port Angeles, Washington. Jay had borrowed Gordon's van, a bronze 1977 Ford Club wagon. After they exited the ferry at 5:30 p.m., they were seen twice heading south on Highway 101. Once in the Washington town of Hoodsport at approximately 8 p.m., and an hour later in the town of Allen. It is believed they were headed toward a second car ferry that went from Bremerton to Seattle. After arriving in Seattle, they planned to park the van near the Kingdome and sleep in it. Jay and Tanya were expected home the following day. When they had not returned or called by the next evening, their families began to worry. William said that Tanya would always call home if she was ever late. When she did not do so that evening, her mother became apprehensive. William tried to downplay the situation for her sake and to reassure himself that everything would be okay. However, on the following day, November 20th, when Tanya did not call, her family knew that something was wrong. She and Jay was then reported missing. On November 24th, Tanya's partially clothed body was found in a ditch next to the isolated Parsons Creek Road near the towns of Alger and Burlington, Washington. She had been raped and then shot in the back of the head with a .38 caliber gun. Police found some plastic zip ties laying alongside the road. It is believed that they were used to secure her in the van. Jay's family had no idea what to make of the situation since he was still missing. Police told them to be prepared for the possibility that he could become a suspect in Tanya's murder. However, neither family believed that he was involved. The next day, Jay's van was found parked near a bus station in the city of Bellingham 14 miles away. Inside, they found a Bremerton Seattle ferry ticket, more zip ties, Tanya's pants, and a blood-stained comforter. At that point, no one was certain what had happened. However, police became more fearful that Jay had also been the victim of foul play. 2 blocks away from the van, under the porch of a tavern, police found more zip ties. They also found the keys to Jay's van, Tanya's driver's license, her wallet, and a half-empty box of ammunition. Significantly, they also found a pair of plastic surgical gloves. Detective Robert Guibo believes that the killer left them behind as a sign to police that they do not need to look for fingerprints because he wore them. He was apparently confident that there was nothing left behind that would connect him to the crime. Even after Tanya's body was found, Jay's family hoped that they were going to find him alive. They knew it was not likely, but they still kept up hope. Sadly, on Thanksgiving Day, November 26th, his body was found underneath High Bridge off Crescent Lake Road near Monroe, Washington, about 50 miles south of Bellingham. It was covered with a blue blanket. He had been beaten with rocks and strangled to death with twine and 2 red dog collars. His hands had been bound with zip ties. Tissues and a pack of cigarettes were stuffed in his mouth. Sergeant Robert Bart believes that the way Jay died was indicative of things that he has seen before inside the prison walls. The things found on him raised suspicion that the killer has been in the prison system before. Police believe it most likely that Jay and Tanya made their fatal rendezvous with their killer on the 10:20 p.m. ferry from Bremerton to Seattle. His intentions when he first met them is unknown. Police feel that he was out to do harm and planned to assault them. Police believe that he set his sights on Tanya, and Jay was in the way. It is believed that he was killed first. Sergeant Bart notes that they were young, friendly, and on their first trip. He believes that they were an easy mark, and that they were easily fooled by the killer. Detective Guibo suspects that the killer made contact with Jay and Tanya in the ferry's lounge. He may have asked them for a ride across the Puget Sound. Detective Guibo believes that by the time they exited the ferry in downtown Seattle, they were in the company of the killer. He also believes that the killer has successfully committed similar crimes in the past. Since he has been successful so far, Detective Guibo believes that he will continue to commit these crimes until he is caught. Of course, he does not want to be caught. For example, he used gloves to not leave fingerprints behind. Detective Guibo believes that he is very dangerous, but the killer might have made one mistake. He may have taken Jay's black waist-length ski jacket with red piping on the sleeves and Tanya's olive drab day pack. There is a chance that someone may have noticed him with these incriminating items. One final note on this sad story is that over the Christmas holidays, just 4 weeks after the murders, Jay's and Tanya's families each received a morbid greeting card. They were filled with taunting descriptions of the murders, and their author claimed responsibility for them. He also wrote of his hatred for Canadians and said the opportunity to kill was too good to pass up. He also threatened to kill again and bragged that he would never get caught. To date, 19 of these cards have been mailed over 3 different holidays. The author remains a complete mystery, postmarked from New York, Los Angeles, and Seattle. All of the cards were written by him. They were sometimes signed Tanya or Jay. The handwriting in the cards is very distinctive. There are also some phrases in them that are distinctive. Hallelujah, bloody Jesus, and greetings and salutations seem to be favorite phrases of the author. As of yet, police have not found anything in the cards that would definitively prove that that author is the killer. Regardless, he continues to make life miserable for Jay's and Tanya's families. There is a frustrating lack of evidence in this case. Police are fairly certain that the killer is an ex-convict familiar with the Washington area. They hope that he may have talked about his crime and that someone will be able to identify him. They also hope to find out who is writing the tormenting greeting cards. The police believe Jay and Tanya could have met their killer in the lounge on the 10:20 p.m. Bremerton ferry to Seattle, although it is more likely that they met him on the latter one. Police believe that he asked them for a ride, then tried to sexually assault Tanya. It is believed that Jay was killed for being in the way and Tanya was killed to cover up the sexual assault. They also believe that he became prepared with a kill kit to commit the murders. It likely contained zip ties, a gun, gloves, and other tools. Based on the way Jay was killed along with evidence found with his body, police believe that the killer may have done time in prison. His efforts to conceal his identity are indicative of someone familiar with police procedures. It is also believed that he is familiar with the areas in Washington where the bodies and van were found. It is suspected that the killer took Jay's waist-length black ski jacket with red piping on the sleeves. He may have also taken Tanya's olive drab day pack and her Minolta 35mm camera with serial number 2067048. Police also believe that the person who had written the greeting cards may have had something to do with the murders. However, they did note that there was nothing mentioned in them that had not been released to the public. Police looked into the possibility that the murders were connected to those of several other couples in the area, including Stephen Harkins and Ruth Cooper. This case first aired on the October 25, 1989 episode. Some sources incorrectly state that Tanya was 17 at the time of her death. This case was also documented on Forensic Files 2 after it was resolved, and the DNA process used to capture the killer was featured on Genetic Detective. Solved. In 1990, police located the camera lens that belonged to Tanya's missing camera at a pawn shop in Portland, Oregon. However, it had originally come from another shop that did not have records from the time it was originally brought in. As a result, police were unable to determine who originally brought it there. Several possible suspects were questioned in the case over the years, including serial killers Robert Yates and Charles Sinclair. Both were active in the Seattle area in 1987. However, DNA evidence from the crime scene cleared them of any involvement. The DNA profile also did not match anyone in police databases. DNA testing later determined that the evidence found at the crime scene did not match DNA recovered from the greeting cards. In August 2010, Victoria cold case detectives finally identified the card's author thanks to tips from viewers of a local TV show, Washington's Most Wanted. He was a Canadian citizen who was in his 70s at the time of his identification. He also had severe mental issues. He readily admitted that he was the author. Police interviewed him for several hours and determined he had nothing to do with the murders. He had heard about the story in the news. Because of the statute of limitations, he was not charged in regard to the cards. In April 2018, Snohomish County investigators released a paraben DNA snapshot composite of the killer that was created based on the DNA evidence. Composites were made of Jim at ages 25, 45, and 65. As a result of the paraben analysis, it was believed that he was a Caucasian male of European descent with hazel or green eyes, fair skin, possible freckles, and possible male pattern baldness. Finally, on May 18, 2018, 55-year-old William Earl Talbot II was arrested in Seattle after his DNA was matched to semen found on Tanya's body and pants found in the van. It was also found on a zip tie in the van. Furthermore, a palm print found on the back door of the van was also matched to him. When the murders were committed, he was 24 and living with his parents in Woodinville, just 7 miles from where Jay's body was found. 2 years before the murders, he was convicted of misdemeanor assault. The arrest was made thanks to genetic genealogy done by Parabon Nanolabs. They uploaded the crime scene DNA profile to GED Match and identified second cousins of the killer. Through this, they were able to create a family tree, which led them to Talbot's parents. They then tracked him down and were able to retrieve a sample of his DNA from a discarded cup. This same technique was used to identify the original Night Stalker. Talbot was initially charged only with first-degree murder in Tanya's case. However, in June 2018, he was also charged with first-degree murder in Jay's case. He pleaded not guilty at a preliminary hearing. Investigators asked for anyone who knew him around the time of the murders to come forward. Several of his former friends contacted police. They noted that he had worked as a delivery driver in 1987. They confirmed that the route he took for his deliveries at the time matched Jay's and Tanya's travel plans. Talbot's former roommate told police that he had seen a blue blanket in his home and car. It was similar to the one found on Jay's body. The roommate also noted that he had a tumultuous relationship with relatives, breaking his sister's arm on one occasion, was involved in drugs, and had personality changes when he drank alcohol. He also recalled seeing a bronze van outside of his home on a misty day in fall 1987. Finally, he recalled that Talbot had taken him to the same general area where Jay's body was later found. In June 2019, Talbot went on trial for Jay's and Tanya's murders. His defense claimed that he and Tanya had consensual sex and that she and Jay were killed by someone else. However, prosecutors noted that it would not make sense for her to have sex with Talbot since she was with Jay was in a foreign country and was on her menstrual period. On June 28th, he was convicted of their murders. On July 24th, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On December 8th, 2021, Talbot successfully had his murder conviction overturned because of juror bias. One of the jurors on this case stated during jury selection that she was not sure if she could be impartial because of domestic abuse in her family. The court stated that they were not sure that the juror was completely free of bias when she made her decision in the case. The court decision was appealed by prosecutors. In December 2022, the state Supreme Court reinstated Talbot's murder convictions, noting that his defense attorneys should have dismissed the juror prior to the trial if they felt she was biased. Sadly, Tanya's father, William, passed away on May 14, 1997, at the age of 61, without seeing her case solved. Her mother, Jean, passed away on March 3, 2020, at the age of 87. Agawam, Massachusetts, near the western Connecticut border, is a small town, and the people who live there like it that way. In 1989, Agawam voted overwhelmingly not to be known as a city, but to remain simply a town, a place where neighbors are friends and friends are family. At the Agawam Middle School, under a dogwood tree in the courtyard, there is a memorial to one of the town's most beloved residents, 24-year-old Lisa ZERT, whose untimely death changed Agawam forever. Her mother, Dee, described her as a special person who was bubbly, outgoing, full of fun. She always had a special rapport with children and treated them like people. They knew that she really liked them. Lisa had grown up in Agawam. After college, she returned home to teach special needs students at the middle school. School counselor Dick Cowles felt that she was a very gifted teacher who made sure that her students felt valued. Her students recalled that she always helped them with their problems and answered their questions, and that she was always nice to them. On Wednesday, April 15, 1992, Lisa left school around 4:30 p.m. She drove directly to Brittany's card and gift shop where she worked weekdays from 5 to 9 p.m. At 5:30 p.m., her sister, Lynn, stopped by. Lisa was working on a sketch for their friend. Lynn recalled that their conversation was normal and that nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She left at around 6 p.m. The next morning at 8:45 a.m., Sophia Maynard arrived as usual to open up the store. She was surprised to find Lisa's car in the parking lot, as it was a school day. The lights were on in the store and the open flag was out. Sophia thought it was strange, and she could not understand why Lisa was there. Then, she remembered that Easter weekend was coming up and that they had planned to blow up balloons. She figured that that was why Lisa was there. Sophia did not think much of anything until she walked inside the store. She called Lisa's name several times, but received no reply. She came behind the counter and found that all of Lisa's belongings, including her drawings, pocketbook, and car keys, were still there. She knew something was wrong, so she went to a restaurant across the street and had them call the police. Police found signs of a struggle in the back storeroom. Several boxes had been smashed. A few traces of blood were found on those boxes and on some greeting cards outside of the room. Otherwise, there was no physical evidence at the store. That day, the Agawam Police Department, aided by the FBI and the Massachusetts State Police, launched a massive search. Lisa's family hoped for the best and feared for the worst. Sadly, on the afternoon of Easter Sunday, April 19th, 4 days after Lisa disappeared, her partially clothed body was found in a wooded area off Route 75 on the edge of town. The location was about 3 miles from the store. She had multiple knife wounds around her shoulders and throat. Although several pieces of evidence were found at the scene, the murder weapon was not located. An examination by the county medical examiner later indicated that she had been sexually assaulted. Never before in the history of Agawam had there been such an outpouring of love, such shared grief. At Lisa's wake, more than 1,000 people stood for 5 hours in a spring rain to pay her tribute. Her family was happy to see so many people come because it showed what kind of person she was and how much of an impact she had. One of her students recalled how she was a friend to everyone. They wished that there were more people in the world that were like her. As Agawam mourned, the authorities pressed their investigation. 3 critical phone tips came in which helped establish a time frame. The first call was from a person who had been in the store at 8:20 p.m. They had made a purchase and actually had a time-stamped receipt. They did not notice anything unusual in the store or about Lisa's demeanor. The second person was a customer of the store who had gone in at 9 p.m. She found it open with the lights on, but nobody was around. She did hear some noise in the back room. She described it as a banging noise. She waited for a minute, and when nobody came out, she left. This suggested to police that Lisa was in the store at around 9 p.m. and in the back room. Further investigation revealed that she had been laying horizontal on the floor. There were 2 kick marks from her shoes on the bottom of the door. The third tip came from a woman who worked near the store. At 9:15 p.m. that night, the woman was on her way home. She stopped at the stop sign at the intersection of Route 75 and Adam Street. While stopped there, she observed a full-size Bronco or Blazer-type vehicle pull off the road into a piece of property that led into the area where Lisa's body was later found. She said that there was an operator in the front, and in the back seat, she believed there was 2 people, one male and female. She saw the female's head go up and down a couple of times as the vehicle drove off into the woods. At the time, the woman thought it was just a carload of teenagers. She drove on. There have been no further clues. Today, the students of Agawam Middle School cherish the memorial they established in honor of Lisa, who, in her own brief life, touched so many of their lives. Dee believes that Lisa's death caused many of her students to realize that life isn't always fair and that they have to be extra careful, and that sometimes, even if they're extra careful, it doesn't matter. She believes that Lisa's murderers have to be punished so that the students know that there is justice in the world. Suspects. The car described by the third woman was a late model, full-size Bronco or Blazer, and was either dark red or dark blue. It has never been found. Police took plaster molds of tire tracks left at the murder scene. They were identified as Cooper tires. The combination of tires on the vehicle were so distinctive, detectives were able to comb through sales records of local dealerships and track down the driver of the vehicle. However, it turned out that he was at the scene with friends several days before the murder. He was ruled out. An unidentified man reportedly watched Lisa and other members of the Healthy Habits Fitness Center while they worked out. This happened shortly before her murder. Witnesses noted that he watched her closely, in a perverted fashion. The man was described as Caucasian, in his 30s, in 1992, 5 feet 10 inches, with a beer belly and wavy light brown hair. At the time, he wore work clothes and drove a red sports car. It is not known if he has any connection to the case. In the weeks prior to Lisa's abduction, she told people that she believed that she was being watched. She also asked several friends and relatives to visit her frequently at the store, as she did not like being there alone. This led investigators to believe that her killer had been stalking her in the weeks up to her murder. Lisa's boyfriend's roommate, Edward Borgatti Jr., was questioned regarding her murder. He is also the son of an Agawam police officer. He was working at a restaurant across the street from the store when she vanished. However, it is not known if he was ever considered a suspect in this case. This case first aired on the October 27, 1993 episode. It was profiled on Crime Watch Daily during the investigation and documented on Dateline and Forensic Files 2 after it was resolved. Dateline also mentions Unsolved Mysteries as profiling it. In December 2015, DNA found at the crime scene was sent to Parabon Nanolabs, a DNA forensic analysis service. The company then created a composite, seen to the right, using DNA phenotyping. Based on their analysis, they determined that Lisa's killer was likely fair-skinned with hazel or brown eyes and brown or black hair. In 2017, investigators looked into 11 suspects who had refused to give a DNA sample over the years. One was 48-year-old Agawam resident Gary Edward Scara. At the time of the murder, he was married with a young son. He had no known criminal record. However, he had been a suspect since 1993 after his ex-wife, now deceased, told her attorney that she believed he was involved in Lisa's murder. He came home late that night and did not tell her where he was. He also had cuts on his hands. She noticed that he seemed preoccupied with the case whenever it was mentioned on television. She also had reportedly found some disturbing writings in his diary that led her to believe he was responsible. She later fled with their son and hid with relatives because she was afraid of him. Unfortunately, because she was an alcoholic, her tip was not taken seriously at the time. In September, a state trooper went to Scara's apartment with a court order, ordering him to provide a DNA sample. He was not home at the time, but his roommate was there. The trooper gave the roommate a business card and told him to have Scara contact him. When his roommate told him about the visit, Scara wrote 3 documents and left them at his girlfriend's house: a confession to Lisa's murder, a last will and testament, and a brief apology letter to her family. He then fled the area. Later that day, Scara's girlfriend found the letters and handed them to the police. He was later found in a Connecticut hospital after he attempted suicide. His DNA was then matched to the evidence at the crime scene. On September 16th, he was arrested at the hospital and charged with murder, aggravated rape, and kidnapping. On September 25, 2019, Scara unexpectedly pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in this case. The rape and kidnapping charges were dropped as a result. He admitted in court to being responsible for her death. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his confessions, he stated that he had been fascinated with abduction and bondage from an early age. On the day of the murder, he let himself do something terrible. He claimed that he had not intended on killing her when he abducted her, but events spun out of his control. Although he never mentioned it in his confession, police believe that he became obsessed with Lisa after he bought a music box from the store. He later gave the box to his then-wife. Wendy Camp married Christopher Britto of Sri Lanka or Kuwait, and they had a daughter named Cynthia. However, their marriage later ended in divorce. In spring 1987, she met Chad No. They worked together at an ice cream parlor in Edmond, Oklahoma, and soon began dating. They were married after she became pregnant with their son, Jonathan. Shortly after, she went into a coma and remained unconscious for weeks. Her affliction was later determined to be multiple sclerosis. Chad was apparently unable or unwilling to deal with her physical difficulties. 1 week after Wendy went into the coma, he told her mother, Jackie, that he had divorced her and was seeking full custody of Jonathan. During this time, her sister, Kimberly Aisha Schnee, was caring for her. However, she was unable to care for Jonathan as she was a newlywed, pregnant, and moving to New York for her husband's work. Wendy's parents approached Chad's mother, Beverly, and asked her to temporarily provide care for Jonathan, which she had agreed to do previously. She then secretly sought and won full custody of him due to Chad having had multiple children out of wedlock, many with underage girls. At the time, he was also heavily into drugs. Wendy's family believes that he had given some to her while she was pregnant with Jonathan, which had then brought on the coma. At the time, Wendy, as well as her entire family, were unaware of what had taken place. She remained in a coma a little over 16 months. She slowly improved and met Leon Camp. They were married in 1990. During this time, she requested and received weekend visitation with Jonathan. For a month, things went smoothly. Soon after, Beverly began refusing to let her see Jonathan, claiming Leon was molesting him during the visits. Upon arrival for one visit with Jonathan, Wendy was shocked to see that the house was vacant, yet no new address had ever been given to the court, nor had she been told Beverly had moved. Another court-ordered visit was scheduled to take place the next week. When Wendy arrived, she was told that Beverly must have forgotten it was her weekend since she had taken Jonathan out of state to Six Flags over Texas. This behavior soon escalated to claims that he was being abused or molested, even though Beverly herself was present for each and every visit. Wendy was beyond frustrated and pointed out numerous times that no one, neither her or any relative, had ever signed over parental rights to Beverly or Chad. Yet the court seemed to turn a blind eye to this fact. The court-appointed therapist, Ginger Leto, determined that the molestation claims had no foundation and cleared Wendy and Leon. Medical tests found no evidence of Jonathan being sexually abused. Visitation was allowed to continue while Chad and Beverly were cited for contempt. They continued to refuse to comply with the visitation order. Beverly later took Jonathan and went into hiding, prompting Wendy's father, Edwin Knox Taylor, to become a gun-licensed private detective. Her family had previously hired one, but soon money ran out. It is not clear if Beverly was found or turned herself in, yet she did surface and the court ordered her to let Wendy see Jonathan. However, the court did not demand her to return him to Wendy, a fact that mystifies her entire family to this day. On May 29, 1992, Beverly asked Chad to call Wendy and invite them to come for a visit. He called and spoke to her. Due to her medical condition, she was unable to drive. Chad replied that Beverly would pick her up and take her home. Later that day, she and Leon were ready to go. Yet Beverly refused to let him come along, saying he would fight with Chad. He felt this was strange, but agreed Wendy could go provided his sister, Lisa Renee Kregear, went with her. Cynthia wanted to go as well to see Jonathan. Beverly seemed extremely agitated and had reluctantly allowed Lisa and Cynthia to go. The 115-mile drive from the camp's house in Oklahoma City to Chad's in Shamrock took just over 2 hours. When they arrived at 1:45 p.m., Wendy called her mother and told her that they were at a restaurant, waiting for Chad to arrive. When he showed up, they went to his house where Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa spent several hours with Jonathan. At 4:15 p.m., Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa left in Beverly's car. Her mother, Ida, also accompanied them. Before leaving Shamrock, Wendy called her mother and told her they'd be home soon. They spoke briefly, as Beverly claimed that she was in a hurry. This was the last time she heard from Wendy. Phone company records verified that she called him at 4:42 p.m. However, everything that happened after this call is up for debate. Beverly's apparent plan was to drive Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa to Oklahoma City and then meet Chad at a restaurant in Cushing between 7 and 8 p.m. According to her and Ida, Wendy argued with them during the trip. Ida claimed that she did not want to put up with Wendy anymore, so she asked Beverly to drop her off at her house. She claimed that she was dropped off around 5:15 p.m. After that, according to Beverly, the bickering continued during the next half hour. Tired of Wendy, Beverly allegedly pulled into a Walmart parking lot in Chandler, 45 miles from Oklahoma City, and ordered Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa out of the car. They were never seen or heard from again. By that evening, Leon became worried when they had not returned, so he called Wendy's parents and her parents called the police. Investigators searched a 5-county area but came up with no evidence. Naturally, Beverly, Ida, and Chad fell under suspicion. Investigators looked into Beverly's alleged time frame. She claimed that they had left Shamrock at 4:30 p.m. She also claimed that she met Chad at a restaurant in Cushing at 7 p.m. Investigators determined that it would be physically impossible for her to get to the restaurant at that time. The trip would have taken more than 3 hours. Also, she drove on a 2-lane highway that was a slower and longer route. Wendy's family is certain that something happened to them. They believe that she would have called Leon or one of her relatives from a payphone at the Walmart. Jackie is convinced that they were murdered that night and that Beverly, Chad, and Ida were all involved. Suspects, Chad, Beverly, and Ida remain people of interest. 2 locals reported that Chad boasted of his responsibility for the deaths of both women, after which he disposed of them in a way in which they would never be found. However, without additional and more concrete evidence, the police are unable to proceed with the case against him. Ida and her other daughter, Deborah, previously were accused of killing Deborah's husband, John Rowson. He was found shot and stabbed to death in his car on June 12, 1980. Ida and Deborah were charged with his murder in 1983, but the charges against them were later dropped. This case first aired on October 20, 1993. The information above was provided with the help of Wendy's family. Beverly declined to be interviewed for the segment. Ida and Beverly were later arrested and charged with arson. They allegedly committed the crime to collect insurance money. In 2007, both were convicted and served time in prison. In September 2011, Ida died of cancer at the age of 82. She was never officially charged in this case. On April 16, 2013, the remains of Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa were found buried 8 feet down in an unmarked grave in Pawnee County, Oklahoma. A Ruger revolver, which appeared to be a .357, and a knife were also located next to them. DNA collected from Kimberly confirmed the identities of Wendy and Cynthia. DNA evidence also confirmed the identity of Lisa. A coroner declared they were victims of homicide. Wendy died from gunshot and sharp force injuries. Cynthia died from homicidal violence of unspecified means. and Lisa died from gunshot wounds to the torso. Cynthia's remains still had duct tape attached to them. Ida's son and Beverly's brother, Grover Pruitt, was arrested on $500,000 bail that was reduced to $50,000. He allegedly led police to the remains, which were buried in a hole under a septic tank on property owned by the Pruitts. Around the time of the disappearances, Ida told him to dig the hole. She later told him to fill it because there's bodies in there. He was charged with accessory to first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty, and a judge later dismissed his case. He died on January 25, 2017. Prior to his death, he made statements that Ida and Beverly had murdered Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa. On March 28, 2014, Beverly was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder in association with this case. On January 20, 2015, she pleaded no contest to helping in carrying out the murders. As a part of her plea bargain, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison and 15 years probation. She was released on January 7, 2020. She passed away on October 13, 2023.